Perfectly well, yes. Thank you very much, Mijail. Spasiba, Russia. Spasiba, St. Petersburg. And well, grazie mille. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Gracias. I'll try to do my presentation between 15, not more than 20 minutes, so we have a room for discussion. The point today I'm going to discuss, and you have my contact details here, and Mijail has my contact details as well, so please feel free to send me an email later. So I'm going to discuss mainly three blocks. Why I'm going to talk about pluralities or cosmopolitanism and sovereignty. What is the situation right now in three sciences: law, politics, and international law. And then my take on how to use Kelsen. I will refer in particular, because of this Congress, to religion, because my specialty has to do with territorial disputes, including religious disputes. And then I'm going to refer to how to apply Kelsen to bring a sort of a better comprehension to these disputes. I think it's very clear what the pandemic showed us in terms of plurality, fragmentation, plurality of, in this case, legal systems. Depending on the legal system, depending on the state in which we were based, we had access or we didn't have access to the vaccines. And even when we had access, it could have been mandatory or not mandatory. That had to do with fragmentation of pluralisms of legal systems. Related to as well how the government apply the law, how the judicial system apply the law, how the parliament or the Congress makes new law, and so on. So that led me to a sort of question. We have a plural world in terms of societies, in terms of politics, in terms of legal systems. But that plurality has to face different sovereignties as well, in the sense of, depending on the legal system, the kind of access we will have to certain things such as vaccines. That goes further, actually, because when we see in particular law and politics, and again, that has to do with my specialty, I've seen the same reality across the world in terms of different territorial disputes. Again, very briefly, because I'm conscious of the time, and that has to do with my 2020 book, that has to do with particular research on territorial disputes. In the Americas, and again, I'm simply going to show the screens here. I'm not going to refer to any of them. In Europe and Asia, well, the case we have right now, Russia, and I've been blessed enough to be in St. Petersburg and in Moscow several times presenting my work on Crimea, Kuril Islands, and so on. We have as well Africa and the Middle East. And I guess my colleagues, as we all know, the case that has been on the news for probably 6 months now, Israel and Palestine. But again, that's not the only case. What I see once again, although we have dissimilarities, some differences in terms of these territorial disputes, I see many coincidences that I relate as well when we had the COVID vaccine. Different jurisdictions, different legal schools, different legal doctrines, different methodologies apply to try to comprehend these disputes, let alone to solve them. I'm not going to refer to this one. But usually what we tend to see, if we are in Russia, if we are in the UK, if we are in Brazil, if we are in Israel, we tend to see a territorial dispute through law or through politics or through international relationships in what I tend to call unidimensional view. This would be a picture of what we see in any territorial dispute. I created my own. It's a fiction. That is my 2017 book. I created, based on the main territorial disputes around the world, the most controversial, I created a fiction, 3 parties. Kemed, Moldavia, and Borduria, and these three parties could be Russia, Ukraine, and Crimea. It could be South China Sea, China, Vietnam, and the sea around them. It could be Argentina, the UK, and the Falklands. It could be Israel, Palestine, and the Gaza Strip, and so on. So again, this is a fiction simply to explain that depending on the legal system, we will focus on the territory, we will focus on the religious aspect, we will focus on the territorial side, and so on. We will have what I call a unidimensional view. Again, this is part of my research. It's ongoing. You have here my main publication in terms of monograph. In addition to that, I have research articles and so on, and some of them have been even translated into Russian. I have Russian papers written in Russian as well about, again, territorial disputes and how to deal with this fragmentation. Again, so what I propose is to tweak, and that's when I apply Kelsen, to tweak from unidimensionality to multidimensionality. What do I mean by that? I'm not going to, you may see here that is my latest book, 2023. If time and the situation allows, because I am right now teaching at Manchester University, I'm hoping to present the whole book probably this year, if not next year, in Russia, because I've been presenting the book around the world. There are different pluralities. It's not only legal fragmentation, and I'm going to focus on legal fragmentation because of this Congress, and in particular, the case of different religions. There are many pluralisms when we talk about disputes. We can talk about different agents, such as individuals, communities, and states. So it's not only about states. Think of indigenous communities, for instance. These communities, these individuals, these states may have different roles to play. Here I apply game theory. They may play as a host, they may play as a participant. Suppose the UK and Argentina are the hosts behind the Falkland Malvinas disputes. The islanders may participate or not depending on the host. So for the UK, the islanders should be part of any negotiations. For Argentina, they cannot be part because they don't have any legal standing. Again, context is not only about the international context. We have a plurality of contexts that influence in a positive and negative way these disputes. And that has to do as well with the different legal systems. It's not only the domestic or the international. We have as well regional legal systems. So I'm talking about a plurality of context. We talk about the international, the regional, and the domestic context. To put the example, right now, Russia-Ukraine is not only the international law, United Nations, or the law in Russia, or the law in Ukraine. The law through NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is having an impact on the situation as well. And that has to do with the different take on international law. And so on. This is just to put an example. There are many pluralities, there are many pluralisms. People tend to think about either people in terms of plurality or legal system. Now, there are many more pluralities. One of the pluralities I'm interested in is the one that Kelsen refers to, and many other authors, when he clearly distinguishes between norm and fact. And I'm going to add a third one, axiology. So it's not only about how a particular situation is, but how that particular situation ought to be according to law, and how that particular situation should or could be according to our value judgment. That is why from this very basic fiction, again, that I build up according to different territorial disputes, I have to be more comprehensive and accept there are many more pluralisms. So these basic territorial disputes we tend to see unidimensionally as legal scholars or politicians or specialists in international relations. It's a bit more complex than that. And again, this is my take on the different pluralisms. As you may see, I talk about context, domestic, regional, and international legal systems. And I talk about different realms, a factual, a normative, and an axiological point of view. In particular, with pluralisms, I apply the concept of cosmopolitanism, which means how can we accommodate these different plural legal systems, these different plural societies, individuals, communities, and states, these different contexts, international, regional, domestic. And this is Kelsen, and for those who are Kelsenian will follow what I'm trying to do here. If we are just a political scientist or an international relations specialist, we tend to define cosmopolitanism in different ways. One of the many ways, again, conscious of the time today, we may classify between moral and legal. Usually, political scientists such as Thomas Pogge from Yale University, he tends to claim, and many others, they tend to claim that in order to have a legal system applicable to all units of concern around the world, we need to think of three main elements. Individualisms, we need to focus on the human or the person. Universality, the status of that person or individual should be global, should be applicable throughout the different jurisdictions. And generality, that particular status should have global binding force. Lawyers, we know that it's not that simple. Why? Because we do have a fragmentation of legal issues. So although the political scientists and international relations specialists have good intentions, they fail to accomplish how to translate this multiplicity, fragmentation of legal systems into one coherent legal status in order to be applied regardless of jurisdiction. And that's why I put here, but sovereignty, because we do have different sovereign jurisdictions. What do we do with that? The best example I can think is here, religion. We must accept, and that's my classification here. I've done research internationally, and I haven't seen this classification, so I had to come up with a classification. Usually, we tend to see, either in law, political science, or international relations, cosmopolitanism as moral or legal. For the reasons I explained, moral cosmopolitanism is not enough. We need to focus, if we want to have global binding principles, regardless of jurisdictional differences, we need to focus on the legal aspect. Now, we may, as we know, we may classify the different schools into natural law and positive law. I borrowed that classification because to me it's important to distinguish normative systems such as law, morality, and religion. And we know some legal systems are heavily influenced by religion. Let's think of Islamic states, for example. They are heavily influenced in terms of, for instance, Sharia law, how they apply the law, even in case of death penalty. So that's why we have legal systems that we may class of more democratic, more liberal, that may not include religious legal systems. So I had to make a decision. If we want a global, binding legal system, we need to think of the distinction between moral and legal, focus on the legal. And when we talk about legal, we need to distinguish between the natural law and the positive law school. And I would advise, as a specialist, that cosmopolitanism should prioritize or should focus on a legal positive law take. And not any positive law, because we will have not only different religious systems that influence legal systems, we will have different moral values that may interpret these legal systems. That's why when I tend to advise here, we should follow Kelsen in the sense of offering for this global project exclusive positive law cosmopolitanism. What do I mean by that? A set of soft principles that can enable different legal systems, whether focused on religions, whether not focused on religions, whether including moral values or not including moral values, to be coordinated together. And that is why, in principle, this set of points should be excluding any morality or religious values. That is why I talk about not international law, I talk about universal law. This is not my vocabulary. People tend to use Kelsen, having not read Kelsen. Kelsen clearly defines and differentiates different kinds of international law. Of course, he's conscious about domestic law. And when he talks about international law, he's very particular about the vocabulary he uses, a pure theory of law and a general theory of state and law. When he talks about international law, he talks about global international law and particular international law. When he talks about global international law, he's talking about things such as United Nations Charter, applicable in principle to most states. That is global international law. Particular international law has to do with special pockets of international law depending on regions, such as the European Union law or the law of the American states or ASEAN in Asia, the African Union in Africa, or particular because of a reason such as security. NATO is an example. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is an example of particular international law. Here, another point to this classification, universal law. And that's what I mean by universal law. It's not domestic, it's not regional, particular, it's not global international law. Universal law is a set of principles in order to coordinate these different legal systems. That is why, to me, universal law, he doesn't really progress into defining universal law. For those who are Kelsenian, we know that he explains the difference between and the relationship between national and international as supraordination, whether national law on top of international or the other way around. And he introduces the idea of coordination, but he doesn't really go into detail. That's why I take that idea from coordination in order to characterize, to define universal law. To me, universal law is not superior, it's not inferior, it's a coordination of principles in order to help domestic, particular international law, global international law work together. The last probably 2 minutes I'm going to take, so I finish on time. These universal law principles that should be exclusive law cosmopolitanism should include, and that's my advice, our differences in terms of different pluralisms as individuals, communities, and states, different contexts, the international, the regional, and the domestic, and other pluralities, which I haven't had the time to refer to in this presentation. And the kind of, that's the conclusion probably to, this is my 2023 book, the kind of conclusion or partial conclusion, because this is a work in progress, it's a lifetime work in progress. I offer a set of 5 soft principles to be part of this coordination of this universal law: acceptability, humanity, effectiveness or efficacy, simplicity, and balancing. We can discuss them later if you have any questions. I'm simply going to mention them. All these principles have to do with exclusive, positive law cosmopolitanisms. I decided not to include moral or religious values within these principles because we have to accept there is a fragmentation of legal systems. So if I want to coordinate different legal systems, and some of them heavily influenced by religious norms and moral norms, I advise to follow Kelsen in the exclusive positive law take. And again, this is my construction in terms of the main principles I see after, again, comparing, contrasting different authors, such as a role, law of peoples. And without anything else for me to say, let me see if I can finish. Yeah. Without anything else, that's probably my partial conclusion. It's much more, it's quite a long research story. Part of the story has taken me to Russia before. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy with that. So we can open for discussion. I'm within 19 minutes. Thank you very much. Спасибо, Mikhail. Thank you very much, Michael, for the question. I'm going to give you two answers that are related. It depends. It depends on whether we think of a top-down or a bottom-up answer. Top-down, I'm talking about the most influential countries in the world, such as the United States, such as Russia, such as China, you mentioned a few, and even India, nowadays with more presence around the world. I see very unlikely they will follow this kind of idea. Why? Because that's why my research intentionally has to do with law, politics, and international relations. It's a matter of real politics. They are not willing to surrender that influence right now. So in that sense, from top down, I don't see any massive changes. We are very slowly thinking of changing the Security Council composition, for instance, to put an example. Now, what I see more likely is a bottom-up approach, without being condescending. I'm talking about least advantaged countries or not as influential countries. Through referendums. I've seen that happening. In particular, my next book, I've already been commissioned to write the next one. I'm going to now put into practice my research, and I'm going to start with the Americas. I'm researching territorial disputes in the Americas. So my next book will be only about the Americas. The next one, probably Europe, Africa, and so on. My research so far, the book will have 10 chapters. I'm writing chapter 7 now. Referendum has been used in America, in particular Central America, to put solutions to sovereignty issues, to territorial disputes. So it's already being used, asking different communities within states, not only a state decision, but different communities within the state, to express their wishes about how to deal with territorial disputes. So I already see there could be a room from a bottom-up approach to start discussing this idea. I think it's too soon right now to think of a top-down approach. I don't know if that answered the question.